Hmm. Welcome back, friends. I'm getting the hang of it. Let's see if anybody's joining us. Admit. Welcome back. Welcome back, Anton. Oh, welcome back, Luis. Welcome back, Domenico.
Guys.
So, what
Jay,
have
just
we
out of
learned?
curiosity, how many different camera angles did you have? Or are your cameras, is one or more of your cameras changing angles? You have like 3 or 4 different camera angles, Jay.
I think I was going to leave, but somebody had a question before I left, and I think it was about whether this
Yeah.
is a 1 hour or 2 hour or 3 hour.
Yeah, we get
Uh,
kicked out every 40 minutes. But thanks for joining back.
I didn't want to leave in the middle
guess-
of a question there.
I guess I can run until 9.
Oh yeah, 9 o'clock Florida time. What that be here?
Anyway,
Welcome back, Asisa. So, what have we learned so far?
be kind.
Can
See you next
Can-
week, 7
see you
a.m.
next time, Luis. So, what have we learned?
Excellent Zoom. Bye.
Can we formulate a book of how to be kind? A user's manual for how to be kind?
Like
How
there's
to
a lot
avoid being mean?
of things that were talked about here that could fit within a manual or whatever it is, like you said, manual book, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. Yeah, because a lot of it makes sense to me. I guess just, like with other things, it just depends on how the words, some words are being used.
Go ahead, Anton. What did you say?
Oh, I said, like, yeah, I think that there's a lot of ideas here that have been talked about over this time period that do apply to kindness with flexibility. But like with other things, I don't know if it's just word choice or some disagreement, some level of disagreement I have with some of the things. Like, for example, the word tolerance could be using the word the same way that I would use it or not. I don't know, like tolerating people, so I added a little bit more onto what I just said just a moment ago. Yeah.
On that, Anton, who's to play the game here? Who are we really tolerating first and foremost?
Well, it seems like one of the things that I've heard you say multiple times, Dominic, is everything goes back to self or authentic self. So that's probably the direction that you're going to go with that. But I don't quite see how that necessarily applies in this context, though.
Well, we're talking from the external part. So everything that we talk about is the external. So the internal would be, who do I accept? Who do I tolerate? Who do I allow? If we can't play both of those games, then we can honestly say to ourselves, we've been failed upon, whether it's from our family, whether it's from ourselves or our immediate community. So for me to hate another human being and even become good at it, I would have to do that within myself. But most people are ignorant of themselves. So that's another word. Again, whatever the self is to somebody. Again, we can play with words too. You can call it the ego, you can call it whatever you want. But if we're always talking from the side effect, externally, why should I tolerate another human being? Well, I am human first and foremost. So what am I really saying about myself? If not, then you play the wonderful world of, you become aware that you're doing all these contradictions. You're not putting all the pieces together. There's many ways of checking the question 1 + 1 = 2. And it's not just about the answer too. What does plus do? What does equal do, let alone 1 and 1? You could use all kinds of words. So if I'm going to tolerate myself, then I should be able to test it with other things, accepting, loving. Now, if I don't want to do it internally, or I just want to ignore it because obviously I've done it. Because there's no way I could actually explain to another human being how to be human if I haven't experienced it myself. So now if I'm going to do the side effect, well, how do I feel about other people? Then I can start playing that game and missing that part that's ever important. This is why when we share very fundamentally with each other things that are safe, opposed to sharing from within. And when we're sharing from within, we're not looking for accolades outside. We're not looking for agreements and disagreements. If you're sure of yourself, and if you say you're sure of yourself, a person should be able to bombard you in whatever way they want. And then you could turn around and say, okay, that was an interesting exercise. What did you get from it? Because if you're sure of yourself, you shouldn't move from it. And this is why when people that are becoming sociopaths, they've numbed themselves so much, and not them, their society, we've all done this to each other, that they basically are pretty confident in where they stand because their absence or they're purposely, consciously trying to ignore certain things like emotions. And then there's people that are so emotionally invested that they will actually deny themselves of their mental state.
Well, sociopaths are interesting because sociopaths actually just, I don't know that it's so much ignoring emotion as much as it is they just don't experience emotion with the same intensity as an average person. So that there's a difference between ignoring and just not experiencing something, like the concept of a manly man, as an example. They just don't experience emotion as in, if they're authentic, they just don't experience emotion as intensely as, you know, what we conceptualize as other than that. So yeah, I mean, I think authentic self has to do with a lot of things, but I don't think authentic self is everything. I do think it is very true that as it applies to how we treat other people or think about other people, now that you clarify what you mean by that, like that it does connect with that. But like, it seems like your idea of reality is everything comes back to the self. And that doesn't fully
words, Anthony. You use the word authentic, which I didn't use, so you can explain that.
I've listened to you multiple times, so if that's not what you mean, what do you mean?
So if you're listening, then and you're listening to me, you're missing the point still. You're hearing me. Listening is always you. Ponder why you say the word authentic self. I never use the words authentic self.
You've never used the word authentic or self before.
I've used the word self, yes, many times.
And authentic.
I've said the word being honest with oneself. That's me talking out loud. I'm not telling other people what to do in that sense. Become aware of it if it's what you want to do. Lack, that's what that means. If we're going to start playing around with the dictionary word, you know, reality, again, that's a perception. We have many effects and many side effects, and each effects and side effects could be interpreted as a reality to each individual person.
What is an authentic self?
Yeah, there you go. Since you brought it up, I'm okay with hearing that out, Anthony and Tom.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I could say if we're using words interchangeably, then it doesn't really matter what words that I'm using. But since like you say, I did bring up the word, and I'm not the only one who has brought up the word authentic and self before. What I mean by that is I use authentic as another word for honest. That's just another example of if words are being used interchangeably, it doesn't really matter what words are being used.
And I've shared in past that we use an English language that has many meanings. It's not a comprehension language. So English, because we speak in a language tonality called English, there's many meanings to the same word, let alone the tone. You know, it's like having a certain note that has many interpretations. And meanwhile, there's other notes that clearly that's that note. And we can gauge it with frequency or whatever. And that's the way it is. So yes, but you've interpreted as honesty, yes, but I've never said the word authentic, but it's the same meaning. Yes, it is. So an honest person, if a person is being honest with themselves, they're going to give this as much airtime to Maxwell House, to anger as they are to frustrations, to happiness. But a lot of people, they want, well, no, a lot of people, they're generalizing again.
So,
I become biased and I might pick one over the other more times than not. I usually lean more towards the feminine side, the negative side first, than the positive side. So when some people want to be positive, they want to do the masculine side. That's the action side. And they don't want to give any airwave to anything else. They want to be stuck there. I purposely pick the other side, willing to go to the other side. But most people say, no, I just want to be positive my whole life. Well, first of all, life is not yours. It's your existence within it. That's me playing those words. Now, for them, they might turn, well, I don't agree with that. I'm like, okay, I never asked you to agree with me or disagree with me.
So is an authentic self a self that is honest with themselves Something like that.
Yeah, we'll see. I think you might be seeing right there, Jay, how, well, I would say myself, how even the idea of self is slippery when you analyze it a little bit more. But yeah, so I mean, that's one thought right there.
Authentic, honest self, know thyself. Those are two words put together. Know thyself. Who's the knower? Who's the self? Authentic self. What's authentic and what's the self? There are two different things going on. Honesty of the self, opposed to self-honesty. That's always pride. Anytime you put the word self before, for me anyway, anytime you put the word self before anything, self-love, self-hate, that's pride talking. But loving the self, hating the self, then what is the ego? The ego is the self, ego, that's the condition, that's the ongoing program. I'm not going to complain to my whole computer if I'm only having a problem with the onboard program, not the hard drive, and vice versa. And it might not even have nothing to do with that. That might have to be with the energy, the electricity that's coming to it, or the receiver coming from the wireless device. We create, or not us per se, but it's in the form of what we're playing with is us as an example, like a car is both positive and negative and grounding. If we can grasp that individually, then you can realize, oh, well, then we're just manifesting, we're only manifesting what we already are. This technology is an example of all the other technology out there. As I'm looking at the two trees behind, or the two cactus behind me, again, there's energy there too. Now, whether they go by what we call positive and negative, but if I realize that's what I am, and I realize that's how cars run, and how the sun and moon runs, there's a good chance they're running the same way. So whatever the self is or isn't should be at least explored. If a person's actually trying to understand their experience, a lot of people just want to experience things. They don't want to actually understand it. They don't really want to have discernment. They don't want wisdom. They don't even want to know about that stuff. So then other people form dogmas, belief systems, and then they'll fit into that system. Mom, I really don't want to do nothing, so you do everything for me. No, I don't want to live under my parents' roof, but I'll live under somebody else's roof. It's a game that we play with ourselves.
Well, is everything belief? This is something that, well, I mean, I know what I would think about. Is everything belief systems? And I don't mean belief as in faith or religion. I just mean, is everything thoughts or patterns that you have in your mind, and there's just different formats, contexts, ways in which you can express it or experience it?
Yes, with the exception that we can collectively compare our belief systems.
It's special.
Yeah. I mean, that still could include the fact that, or if it is a fact, that it is all belief systems. But yeah, we can compare the validity. I don't know if you mean validity, Joel, when you're saying that, or just whether or not the belief system makes sense.
Epistemology or epistemological ideation is the belief system that we have inside our heads. And epistemological reality is what we can experience and demonstrate to others, and they can agree. So when Jairo mentioned it a few weeks ago that I forget exactly what he was saying, and Mike Taylor said, well, that's great that it all happens in your head. It's only a belief system. And Mike said, don't put your finger in your pencil sharpener. That was a way of saying the external reality, even though you believe it doesn't exist, may actually exist. And I think he used the humorous example to demonstrate his point.
Joel, can I share something, Joel? Because I've heard way too many people write this stuff. The head, the brain, is only two receivers of the many other receivers we have. The mental plane gives information to the brain, let alone people say, I lead with the heart or I lead with my gut. Those are all receivers. So when somebody says it's all in your head, that's a person revealing that they're very analytical only, and usually from the left hemisphere. That's the king side. So you receive information to the brain. Thoughts do not reside in the brain. Thoughts are actually what is called the language of consciousness. You can't see thoughts. You can't even see the language that I explain it. But the language that I speak, the sound, the tonality affects the vessel, the external vessel, and also the liquids that's in it. So when somebody says It's all in your brain. They've already told you they're indoctrinates. No different. Somebody says, I lead with my heart. I said, okay, unless you're going to start talking about the blood and the sodium, that there's memory cells within all of that stuff. And unfortunately, can millions and millions of books be misleading? Yes.
So
Very much
Joel
so.
is misleading me.
No, he's not. No, he's not misleading you. He's not misleading you.
Mike Taylor,
I apologize for misleading you, but I just have to check on my coffee.
or then Mike Taylor is misleading me by saying, don't put your finger in the pencil sharpener. He is programming me into that belief system that if I put my pen, my finger in the pencil sharpener, something, I imagine that it won't be pleasant, and it could damage my finger. So maybe he's right. Maybe there is some reality to the pencil
Bingo,
sharpener.
you just said something right.
And
Anton said something about our belief system, and then Joel says something. Once you start saying right to it, or I agree, that's how you get away from your own story, your belief. And then that's why we have a group thing called a dogma, where it's your story. The way you existed while you're inside this plane, you're never outside of that plane. So for you to say, Dominic, I agree with the way you talk, I'm like, you've never experienced through my voice. You're sharing your belief system, let alone, and then you can have knowledge. You can know that there's a difference. This is where, excuse me, wisdom come in, discernment. You know, there's a difference. You can discern the difference. So discernment, now you're talking about the mind is actually aiding you in that decision. So now when somebody says, I got to follow this religion, it's kind of like we all are in a gang, and only, well, I'm just using you, Anton, as an example. Anton saying this is how we crack our eggs. So then we all agree upon it. So we've given up our own experience to agree upon him. And now Anton's no longer with us. And now we keep on doing that. Now that becomes a dogma. We've all lost our own stories. So when we start saying, I agree, or I disagree, or I like it or dislike when other people are doing it, you could actually, you're in the side effect. You can actually capture that in thought and say, wait a second, that's an interesting share. Why would I have to say I agree or disagree with them? Now I'm actually going to play the duality game, because now I've lost myself in this conversation. Now I'm thinking, well, I don't feel comfortable telling other people how I feel. Well, somewhere in your system, you've been failed upon, misled is probably the best word. Not saying your parents or your relatives do it on purpose. But when somebody says, well, Dominic, I don't agree with what you're saying, I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Very interesting. Why would you say that? Why? Because there's so many things in the world that we might perceive as right and wrong. And even though that's a game, then why would you say what comes out of my mouth is wrong? And people get heated over that. That's like when people say, I don't agree with abortion, but yet they'll try to harm or kill another human being that practices that. That's the irony, because they're really not really appreciating life and death. Actually, they're actually favoring more death than life. In that sense.
I think, there is definitely a lot of dogma. I think dogma is, for one thing, it seems like it can apply to anything, that you can have a dogmatic attitude of anything. So then it becomes the staunch version of that. But are you saying that all beliefs are subjective, or all experiences are subjective, Dominic?
Again, Anton, when we play this likes and dislikes, agree or disagree, then we have to play the subjective objective. We live in a realm called spiritual, this is my version, spiritual and material. So yin and yang, unknown and known. We aren't any of those things, but at the same time, we are all those things. This is where even Louise is trying to put them all together. And then we play this game of zeros and ones. That's just another way of describing it. We have so many languages, you know, numbers is the languages, how we play this spiritual material, thoughts and emotions. You know, when people say it's very illusional, well, the illusion is always in the thoughts and emotions. Karma is in the action. So when people say, well, you're always creating more karma, every time you move your physical hand, that's karma, that's action. And that's why we have the word act, action, fact, factual. We have the word, all those words in there, because it's almost like somebody saying, listen, we're all going to go on a trail, a forest, where we're going to leave you landmarks. And in different cultures, we're going to give you different kinds of language, and they'll have different meanings or different sounds or Sanskrit, different healings, all that kind of stuff. And when a person becomes aware, I no longer want to only experience life and death through the physical. Then you can start realizing, but wait a second, what are thoughts and emotions then? Those are all experience, and they're more superior. If there's such thing as superior, that's a duality again here, where I'm experiencing way more in my thoughts and in my emotions than I ever do on the physical plane. And that's a simple observation. Every time you say, well, I'm going to go to Italy. Well, I've said so many words. By the time I actually go to Italy, take a plane, and I'm using words to describe all of that, I've experienced a gazillion different things before I even get to a plane called Italy. And even that, who determined that that piece of land is called Italy? Bang, Anton, there's our dogma. We've agreed upon the language. We've agreed upon, we named a certain plane, landmass, Italy. Those are all dogmas. Now, to know about that, I now know the language, and I do know where Italy is based on somebody else calling this landmass. That's just knowing. That's things. Now, to have wisdom and understanding to aid the child called knowledge. But most people get stuck on the stumbling block called belief systems. They think that's it. And then they decipher that's good or bad. Opposed to, this is what it is. I look at a wall. I don't see the wall. I see the material, the object, and I give it the spiritual name or subjective name, and I call it a wall. But how many of us really collaborate together and say, let's really break down the sound to the word wall? This goes back to the monkey cracking a coconut. You need the energy of your immediate community to actually teach you how to break that down. If not, then we're just one voice among thousands of other chaotic voices, and that energy will never actually penetrate to describe, okay, so there's a W in the word wall. What does wall mean? Then some people can pick up colors. Some people can pick up frequencies. And then we start sharing with each other. And then we start realizing, damn, I always knew all that stuff, but I needed somebody to lead me to re-engage my own leading. We're such a slow snail trail pace when it comes to humanity as a collective. None of us create this technology. And if there is, it's few and few in numbers. And that's pretty arrogant on my part saying none of us. There's me again generalizing.
Well said. So what have we learned today? So that there are dogmas, there are belief systems, and then there is wisdom. So how do we extract wisdom from a belief system?
With coffee.
Oh, with a filter,
Oh,
coffee filter.
I wish it was that easy. I was just about to say that's a good question, Harold. Yeah.
Jay, wisdom is for it's a discernment of knowledge. It's belief systems.
Discernment, as in discern is to extract or to differentiate, to see what's right and wrong. Is that what discernment means?
Well, I don't know about right and wrong. It's like when you see things and you can discern a direction you want to go. You're being guided now. You're not putting in one of your belief systems such as right and wrong. But
like
you can
when
be.
you touch your hand on a hot stove, you discern that it's hot through your senses, and somewhere, if it's not the brain, maybe it's the mind, it decides, well, maybe it doesn't even decide, maybe it's automatic. So that's system one thinking. So I go, it takes it off the stove. So maybe that's not even discern, that's a reflex. Does that involve discernment? Maybe not.
There is some discernment. Some people might
Maybe
call it
bodily. It's all body.
Well, the body has its own consciousness,
and the body tells the brain to remove the hand.
Yes, there is a backtrack. You can, it's a two-way communication. The brain can communicate with different parts of your body, and your body can communicate with the brain. Same with the heart. We've just never worked collectively to say, listen, we can regenerate our own bodies and maybe even discern whether or not we should be doing this or not. Because then eventually people are going to say, okay, you want to see some of the side effects. Here's your body now in disease mode. Because putting your hands on the stove could be say, okay, well,
So
it's
is
not
that putting the hand on the stove and discerning or sensing that it is hot and not good? Is that a kind of epistemological realism, Dr. Joel? Oh,
Ooh,
you're
he
muted.
he called you doctor. Ooh.
Professor Joel. Oh, you're
Ooh.
muted, Joel. We can't hear you.
I usually prefer doctor, professor, but that's only when I can't be king.
Hey, Joel.
Oh, Your Majesty.
Oh, now you're getting it.
I lean more towards the jester. Joe plays more the jester. But anyway, go ahead.
Mr. Joel.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What was the question?
So is that a form of epistemological realism when I put my hand on a hot stove and the experience is realistic as opposed to idealistic?
I think that's a fair analysis. If your epistemological ideal is that nothing matters or nothing exists outside of my own head, I think there's an epistemological reality that happens to you if you're, unless you're diabetic or you don't have sense of feeling in your hand or something, and you'll feel pain, and then your epistemological ideal will come into conflict with nature's reality, and you'll say, I've got an owie, depending on how hard you put your hand on the stove, or you may burn your whole hand off, God forbid.
But
And-
if we're living in a matrix and the mind is generating the stove and the hand, then those two objects don't really exist. They're only ideas in this
But-
simulation, in this video game, in this
Well-
arcade.
Well, based on your assumption, you started your statement by saying if elephants could fly and birds had long noses, but that's all just imagination. Reality, that's why it's called epistemological realism. What do
Yeah.
we accept? And we find that by, well, let me give you an example in this meeting, okay? I have never met any of you in person, but in my epistemological idealism, I firmly believe that you are real people and you really exist. Jairo, I really think you're in Florida. Anton, I've met you because I've met you in several places. We've interacted over time. And maybe it's like a bird that gets used to somebody coming to the park all the time. Maybe the bird never gets close enough to touch the person, but still, over repeated exposures, the bird believes that you're not a threat to him. And I make chirping sounds, and you like to listen to them, or you don't, or whatever the case may be. The same with Anton. I believe you are a real person.
Oh, so you're saying that epistemologically, it's still an idea that's happening several times and enough times that you decide, well, maybe Anton does exist as
Well, if through
on its own
repeated
side.
repetition and exposure, we can form ideas of the outside reality.
Oh, ideas that model reality or that suggest that it's there by itself. Like Anton is independent of Joel.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
Pretty much. Unless this is all a dream that you're having, Joel, and none of us exist, and you just are very good at generating all this.
Well, that would define my experience, because if I hit leave meeting, then do you people fail to exist? If I hit leave meeting and rejoin the meeting and one or more of you are no longer there, but other people are there, I understand that there's this electronic mechanism that connects us to communicate with each other. And all these exposures give me a belief about how the system functions and the world
A
functions.
belief system? Is that a belief system?
I think
Is
it
that
is.
a dogma also?
All of it is. All of it's a
Well,
belief system, even the words that we're using.
It's a belief system, I think, but it only becomes a dogma if somebody illustrates to me, either through their explanations or I experience something that tells me that my beliefs could be wrong. Now, I think what prevents it from becoming a dogma is the possibility that I entertain that I can change this at all times. Because I went through this in my head, Hira, the first time I met with you and Mike and whoever was there at the time. I said, Mike is a math professor. Is he really? Is he in Florida? Is he really? Could it all be, nonsense? So I started looking for clues that would either confirm or deny. And I saw that Florida's in the Eastern time zone, and Mike lifted his hand to the screen one time and he had his wristwatch on, and he had the same time on the watch on his wrist that I have here in the Eastern Standard Time Zone. So all these little things started to coincidentally mesh, and all of them collectively. And I watched how he behaved. He spoke like a professor. He seemed to know what he was talking about. He gave good explanations of things that, at least to me, I found them appealing. Maybe not everybody did. Maybe not everybody agreed with them. But for me, it was enough to satisfy me that he's also a real person.
But is all that gathering of data and assumptions you've made, is that still a belief system?
Yeah.
Or when does it become a foundation of knowledge, or a fact, or how do we determine,
Our
or it's
senses.
still overlapping, or it's too complex, but you go on living with your belief system until otherwise you find that it's wrong somewhere.
The belief system, guys, you're talking about, as Joel's trying to explain, our senses, and then we perceive its reality, that's actually a belief system. Unless you question your senses, where you can touch somebody or hear somebody or see or taste, those are all belief systems. They become dogmas because we're all using a common language now. That's a dogma. People think religion's a dogma. That's just one. Religion, senses is a dogma. Reason is a dogma. When we start gathering each other and say, I agree with each other, now we've gone from a belief system to a dogma, which is the same idea.
Oh.
So now when somebody says, when I touch you guys, or you guys are near me, you're just validating the belief system. Now, I don't care what language we use, it's still a belief system. And we don't realize you're always in the box, and the box has millions and millions of things.
So
And
are you saying that a dogma is a belief system that encompasses more than one person? Like when
Yes,
I
all of
believe
us.
what you believe, then we have a dogma?
Then you become a dogma, yes. And now you can know of it. You can be the observer of that. You can know for the first time, like knowing. People use the number 9. They'll know how to use in a certain application. And then I present to them 9 times 9 is 81. Why does it add up back up to number 9? And you can do that with almost every number you multiply number. Now they've gone, well, I've never knew that before. I said, yes, but you always knew about the number 9. Because there's your dogma. Everybody knows that language, 9 is its own dogma. So now when we play these words, autonomy and all this other stuff, that is just an extension of the dogma. That's all it is. I don't care if you're a soccer team, you're playing a dogma game. Now, they might make it sound nice. Of course, we all make it sound fancy. I'm talking from a belief system, but I'm going to pretend I'm not talking from a belief system. And I'm going to try to say to everybody else, no, you're talking from within the box still. We all are. We all are. Now, if you don't, then question when you go to sleep, where do you go? When we're talking for an hour or 2 hours or whatever, who's functioning the vessel? That's a humbleness. And then you're 60 or 70 or 80 years, you realize I know fuck all. Because if I do, even when some people say, well, Dominic, I know nothing, I said, now you're just purposely being ignorant. That's what it really means. Or being nice, another word to say ignorant. There's so many different words we describe, but we think because I've gone to school, I became a professor, fuck all still. I say that with all sincerity, not out of silliness and sincerity, because that's the same energy. Sincerity, because people just don't lack to want to know things, but then they'll ignore their needs to pursue other wants. Physical, only the physical. When a person says, I haven't seen you face to face, they're validating that I'm always still caught up in the physical, because then you have to start questioning, wait a second here, but I'm actually talking to the person. If the person never spoke the language, how would I know I'm talking to them then, or communicating with them? Or you saying, Jay, if I put my hands on the stove, what happens if you're a child that you've never learned the language, but you just know intuitively not to jump into the fire, or somebody else knows I can walk on fire? So that breaks out the program that we've all been conditioned to this point, and we're continually being programmed that, well, then it must be my likes and dislikes. Where did I get that? Did I get it from my friends? Did I get it from me? Or did I get it from within the womb? Most of us have been programmed within the womb. And if we really start investigating, well, some of my fears are my mom's. Some of it's the people that she hung around with. And until we start questioning that, then we start saying shit like, you're a professor, you're a doctor. We're all fucking gestures. We're all playing this comedical game with ourselves. You give me a person that's a professor, I'll fucking rip into him just to see if he's sure of himself. And if he isn't, he's either prideful or he's thinking, well, Dominic, you really don't understand. I said, that's a given in my world. I'm never going to understand you. Wisdom first, understanding next. Now, if people want to play this, well, I do the Kabbalah and the tree of life, there's a reason, and I'm even using reason to look at it. But I realize I'm still supposed to question reason, question thinking, question feelings. It's our responsibility. But when a person says, but I don't question those things, I said, so then what are you then? You're in a belief system and you're aimlessly living life or death. Now, like I said, I can question almost anything because it's a language. Now, I can say almost anything because then some people can start talking to me in a language I've never heard before. So then what am I questioning? I'm questioning, well, I don't understand it. That's a question. That's a question within a question. But it doesn't mean I'm going to understand them.
So we have 3 minutes left. So what have we learned today? There's dogma, belief systems. There's epistemology. That's the theory of knowledge, especially with regard to its methods, validity, and scope. Epistemology is the investigation of what distinguishes justified belief, from opinion. Everyone has their opinion. So is there a way to if someone gives an opinion, is there a way to determine if it's justified? The term epistemology comes from the Greek words episteme and logos. Episteme can be translated as knowledge or understanding.
Yeah.
What are
knowledge is
the
like
methods of gathering knowledge? Are there methods of gathering it and validating it?
belief systems you gather, knowledge you're just aware of it. Knowledge is like a surname to understanding.
Gathering knowledge through the senses. Is there
Yes,
is
that's a
there
belief
a way to
system.
gather knowledge that doesn't involve the senses, the 6 senses? There's
Knowledge. Okay, you're talking about senses. Senses is a gathering of belief
including
systems.
the mind as a sense.
You're jumping around, Jack. You're jumping around. You're asking a lot of questions, but I don't think you're really listening inwards. Because if you did, a lot of those things are self-explanatory. So
This will be
when you're
talking
about senses are belief systems. You can gather them. Knowledge is to know about them. You're not gathering knowledge. Now, in this case, as Joel put it, knowledge is like the surname to understanding. Understanding is the father figure. Knowledge is the child. And if you don't have wisdom, you're not going to know the difference. You know, this is the crap fuck we write. And then we put words, etymology. Is that a Greek word? If it is, that it's a comprehension language. But once you put in a meaningful language, it loses its meanings. Because why? Because it has many meanings, and this is how we lose it. You know, like we all become scholars when it comes to reading, but we don't even realize what reading really does to us. It teaches the hemisphere to be very linear, and you're ignoring the other 10 receivers in your bodies. That's child's play. I'm sorry to say, I'm being very arrogant right now, but that's child's play.
This will be the last few seconds left. Thank you for joining us in Wake Up and Think Clearly. I hope that this has been useful, and I hope that you have become a clearer thinker and know how to discern knowledge, valid knowledge from opinion.
Wow. There's a lot that was mentioned in this conversation.
And what about kindness? I hope that we be kinder to each other
Mhm.
versus
Yeah.
mean.
That was a great topic, especially because people were saying